Hi everyone. We thought we'd do a slightly different format today. I'm with Professor Sarah Wilson, and Sarah is the head of the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. She's an expert in cognitive neuroscience and a clinical neuropsychologist, and I had the fortune of being with Sarah on a panel recently as she was sharing her insights in what many of us are feeling right now with COVID-19, feeling all different range of emotions just as community members as well as staff immersed in the response to COVID-19. And so I thought, and several of my colleagues thought, it would be fantastic to hear a bit from Sarah about why we're feeling, how we're feeling, and what we might be able to do about it, because COVID-19 is going to be here for a few months and it's making many of us feel all sorts of different and new things. So we are very lucky to be part of a large university community which has all sorts of experts, and we have a world-leading expert on neuropsychology and a practicing clinician as part of our faculty of medicine. So welcome to Sarah.
Thank you, and I'm really pleased to be here.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start with a question about why there's such a varied response to this virus. You've seen varying reactions in the community, I'm sure amongst your staff. Can you just explain to us why people respond to this sort of event so differently?
Yeah, the variability is striking, and I think that's one that really stands out. And when someone's reacting differently to what you're reacting, that's also hard to understand and can create additional complexity and additional emotions in response to that. But basically, we know that when we're facing new and uncertain, ambiguous situations that are associated with a threat, that activates our fight-flight system and brings about heightened worry and anxiety. Now, when we experience fear emotions, we experience those emotions differently. So there are different components of emotions. Some people principally feel emotions in their body, have a strong physical reaction. For others, it's an emotional reaction, and for others, it's cognitive. So they get a lot of cognitive emotional symptoms. Some people, therefore, will present differently, even though the underlying response is the same, because the mixture of physical, emotional, and cognitive symptoms will differ.
I'm seeing a lot of heightened anxiety in the community. I'm sure many people may well feel like that here at work. And this sort of rush and anxiety for purchasing goods, purchasing toilet paper. Where does that come from?
So we know that we have three protective biases, and we started to talk about that a little bit yesterday on the panel. This idea that we're better than we are on average, or we think we are, that we have more control over the world than we actually do, and that the future is rosy, and it's not always. And these three biases, or positive illusions, are very well established in the psychological research literature, and they're considered that, although they're not necessarily entirely accurate, they're considered highly protective of our mental and physical health. And that's because they maintain a set of healthy and adaptive coping behaviours in everyday life. Now, when we have a threat like COVID-19, or it might be threat of some other terminal or life-threatening situation, those biases all of a sudden get really challenged. And for some people, they get completely shattered. So that sense of control, the rug gets pulled out. For others, they may take a more measured approach and hang on to those biases a little bit more firmly. And depending on your background, your previous history, and the type of personality that you have, of course, that will change that. But once those biases are threatened, that then activates that flight-fight system, and you'll experience these different facets of the fear response in your body, emotionally and cognitively, with worry and scary thoughts. In response to that, some people try to exert control, regain control. And so they do things that they think will help them gain that control and be protective. And one of the things that they do is that they go out and they buy lots of stuff in case they've got to, be in a bunker for the next 3 months or whatever it is they're thinking. And we know that people buy toilet paper, and it does seem bizarre because we know that toilet paper can't protect you from getting COVID-19, but they buy toilet paper because that's associated with sanitation and hygiene, and purity and cleansing or cleanliness. And so whenever there's a threat of infection, people will naturally gravitate towards purchasing products that promote the opposite. And toilet paper is very symbolic of that.
Okay.
So we would see that as a natural, somewhat irrational, but nonetheless natural, fear-based behavioural response.
Yes. By the way, for the record, I've not gone out to buy any extra toilet paper. My family's giving me a really hard time about this. We're down to 2 rolls and everyone's there, and they keep saying we're not going to panic. Yesterday you gave a wonderful analogy about COVID-19 being like a lion in the Serengeti. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, how this could be sort of biological evolutionary response to something, and how fear gets amplified?
Yeah. So basically we know that just like the virus is contagious, so is anxiety. Emotions generally are contagious. We pass them on to each other. When we're laughing together, we all laugh together. But so too when we're fearful together, we are frightened as a herd or a pack. And if we think about evolution, we know that that's been selected for, and it's been adaptive for us. So that if there is a herd grazing calmly on the Serengeti plains, let's say Thompson gazelles, and there is a lioness creeping up, one animal picks up its ears, and very quickly that ripple of fear runs through the whole herd. And then all of a sudden they run, and that gives the herd maximum chance of survival. And of course the animal that doesn't notice that is the one that gets eaten. So taking on that anxiety, the contagion of fear, is a naturally built response. And just like we're now taking all sorts of behavioural measures to decrease contagion of the virus, hand washing, social distancing, so too we need to step back and take measures for decreasing contagion of fear, because we know that the more time we spend thinking and exposing ourselves to this stuff, the higher our fear levels will become. And social media is the perfect machine to propagate that, because there's all sorts of misinformation and rumour and hearsay, and it's mostly catastrophic. It's worst case scenario stuff. And that's the best way. If you want to have a full-blown fear response, think worst scenario or catastrophic scenario, which we know doesn't always happen. So the types of things we need to be doing to decrease that fear contagion is stepping back. We don't have to take on board other people's emotions. We've got a choice. We can choose not to allow that transfer. We can step back and say, okay, well, I can see that they're a bit panicking, but it doesn't mean I need to be. I can think about this a little bit differently. What is the real risk? How big is this risk to me personally? And whilst this is a bad thing that's happening, I can choose to react calmly, or I can choose to react with fear. And it's that choice of how we respond that we can control. And so rather than running out and buying toilet paper, which is probably not helpful because people like yourself might run out.
I have already. I'll be stealing it from work. Yeah.
Me too. Do something which actually manages your emotional reaction and regulates your emotions. That's far more useful to yourself and to the people around you.
What's some practical examples about how you might do that?
Okay, so you might look and say to yourself, is my, thinking at this point being catastrophic, worst case scenario? And if so, is there another way I could be thinking about this? So how could I reframe what's happening in the community right now and look for some of the positives? Glass half full, glass half empty. And if my thinking is catastrophic, how might I just change that dialogue slightly in my mind to make it less catastrophic? So rather than saying, oh, we're all going to die, well, no, we're probably not. Well, not of COVID anyway. Some people will die, and that will be sad, but we do have inbuilt mechanisms of coping with death. And we face this every day in many other ways. And this is no different. Those same mechanisms that we have already developed to cope with other fearful or sad situations will kick in, and we can use those to apply to this situation.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's been great, and I hope you'll come back and speak to us again. Next time I'd like to focus a bit more about how some of our staff who are at the front line might be feeling in ways that you could advise them of responding to the work pressures over the next few months.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Delighted.